Then I call on members to introduce themselves each so that we know who is present.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Aden Duale, member of this committee.
Moses Cheboy, Deputy Speaker and member for Kudesoi North.
Okay, there. I'm Cecily Mbarire, Member of Parliament, nominated and as the Deputy Majority Whip.
And I'm David Kosing, MP for Poko South, Chair Transport and Housing. Where you coming?
David Gekaria, Nakuru Town is constituency, Chair Energy.
Yusuf Hassan, the Member of Parliament for Kamukunji, Nairobi County.
Joyce Manikor, member for Turkana County and a member of this committee.
Lillian Tomtom, West Pokot County, MP, member.
Dr. Rachel Nyamai, MP Kitui South, Chair Lands and member of this committee.
Khatib Abdallah Mashatani, member of Parliament Lunga Lunga, Vice Chair of Lands Committee and a member of this committee.
Kimani Shongo, member of Parliament Kikuyu, Chair Budget and Appropriations Committee.
William Chekut, member of Parliament of Ainapkoi constituency, was in Kishu County, Vice Chair, Special Accounts Committee and member of this committee. Thanks.
Thank you. Benjamin Jomo Washali is my name, MP Mumias East, which is in Kakamega County, and my Majority Chief Whip.
David Olesankok, nominee 001, representing person with disability, member of this committee.
Haika Mizigi, County MP, Taita Taveta, and a member of this committee.
Sabina Chege, MP Muranga County, Chair Health Committee, and a member of this committee.
Sarah Korere, member for Laikipia North, and a member of this committee.
Lord, I can see there's one member who I'm sure he will introduce himself when he comes, when he finds his way. Very well, it's not the one. We will require you also to introduce yourself formally on record from the answer to capture these proceedings properly, and thereafter proceed to tell us about yourself, where you were born, where you went to school, and work experience in which areas, and very briefly also, you've been nominated for Cabinet Secretary to the ministry, a very large ministry, Lands, Housing, and Urban Development. We want you to, in the course of telling us about yourself, also indicate to us how you feel that your background and work experience and knowledge, professional and otherwise, would suit you to this docket. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You will excuse me. I have a slight cold, so my voice may be distorted. My name is Farida Karoney. I was born in Nandi County. Started my primary schooling in Nandi, different schools, but I did my primary level education at Kapsabe Township Primary School. Then I proceeded to Kipsigis Girls High School for O levels. Then I went to Moi Girls High School in Eldoret. From Eldoret, I went to Kenyatta University, studied education, majoring in botany and zoology. From Kenyatta University, I taught for maybe less than a year. Then I transported to media by accident, so to speak. Initially, I had meant to go back to Kenyatta University to do a master's degree in environmental science. However, I did not get the scholarship, which was intended for the program. So I decided to drop out of the program and went into media. So when I went into media, that was in 1994, I started as an intern. I figured that I didn't have the relevant skills to do media, but I had a lot of experience in environment matters. So I started writing as an intern on environment matters, but decided to pursue training in media. So I joined the University of Nairobi, the School of Journalism, and studied for a diploma in mass communications and graduated in 1996. Then went back to media in KTN, where I was hired as a reporter. I was a reporter at different levels in KTN until about 2000. I started as a junior reporter, trainee reporter, senior reporter. By the time I was leaving KTN in 2000, I was features editor. And by features editor, I mean I was both a producer and a reporter. It meant I could go to the field and I could sit on the desk to manage other team members. Why this is important, Mr. Speaker, is it is during this course of being a features writer that I started interacting with other Kenyans, because that role took me to different parts of the country, and it is during this time that I interacted with marginalized communities. So from KTN, I will come back to that later and why it is relevant to this job. From KTN, I went on to Nation Media Group. I was hired as a news producer. This is a role that entails managing news gathering. People bring stories from the field and you sit and sieve it, because in a news operation, you get a lot of information. What you then do as a news producer is to filter so that you have only the important information passed on to the public. I was in that role until 2004, both reporting and being on the desk. And I then went back to KTN to become an acting news manager for a few months. And then from there, I did several layers of management there, news management, managing editor in charge of KTN. Then I was managing editor in charge of strategy and planning. Then in between, I went to school. I decided, because I was transitioning from news production to general management, I decided to go to school in 2005. And this is how I went to the University of Nairobi to get an MBA. The reason why I chose to do a postgraduate program in business and not in media is because I felt I already had sufficient media experience but needed management experience. So I did an MBA and graduated in 2008 with the focusing on strategy. My specialization was strategy. I then went back to KTN. At that point, I was the head of editorial in KTN for a couple of years. Not a couple of years, because this is now after graduating. It was just before I transited to Royal Media. I then moved over to Royal Media. By the time I was going into Royal Media, and the details are in my CV, Mr. Chairman, I was already Assistant Director at KTN in charge of broadcasting operations. In that role, Mr. Chairman, you would be responsible for managing the operations of the broadcasting business, looking at resources, allocating resources, human resource development and management, and managing finances. From there, I went on to Royal Media in 2009, February. I was hired there as editorial director, responsible for the editorial strategies of the company, both for TV and radio then. We didn't have our digital platforms then, we have them now. But at that point, I was responsible for editorial management, basically editorial strategies for the group, making sure that the company is properly positioned editorially and that your product is competitive to the public. I served in that role, Mr. Chairman, until 2014, when I was promoted to Chief Operating Officer. That is a senior management position in which I was responsible for day-to-day strategy of the business, helping the MD and the other senior directors in coalescing the teams and keeping the vision alive of the company. The owners of that company, when they started the business, their intention was to serve the public, and that is why most of our brands are called Citizen or Citizen TV. It's basically to align ourselves with the strategy of the company then. So I served in that role from then up to now. One of the key things I was doing in that role is managing relations between our business, other businesses and government. So it was a business management job where you not only manage income, you also manage relationships with stakeholders. That is important, Mr. Chairman, because no organization is able to succeed without properly managing its relations with other stakeholders. This will be significant in my transitioning to my next role. If, Mr. Speaker, you do approve this nomination, I am hoping, Mr. Speaker, at the end of this 1 hour session, you will be persuaded, the honorable members will be persuaded that indeed His Excellency the President made the right choice for nominee for Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development. So why is this extensive experience in media important, you might ask? You might be thinking, but you're media, you're coming into public service, how is all that experience in writing stories and managing relations important? Mr. Chairman, this is how it is important. First, I feel, as an outsider sitting outside government, that government programs are not sufficiently communicated, that a lot of the good things done by government are unknown to the public. They are probably known in the year of the election, because that is the time the politicians will go out and start saying, this is what we have done, we have built roads, we have brought electricity. But communication should be an ongoing process. As government, you should be managing your relationships with your stakeholders, which is literally the Kenyan public, throughout your life as government. So that is one area I feel my experience as a communications expert will come into play and support government. I know that in government, it is not the ministry that I'll be serving that will benefit from this experience. My colleagues in cabinet, if I'm so appointed, will benefit from the same experience because I know the inside workings of media. I will support them, as indeed they will support me in the areas in which I don't have sufficient competency to support government to communicate better with the Kenyan people. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, my experience as a senior management officer has allowed me to interact with human resource. You know that, Mr. Speaker, if you manage any organization, it doesn't matter whether it's public or private, it isn't possible to succeed if you have not taken care of your human resources. And this is where my skills in strategic management will come in. At my level, as CS, Mr. Chairman, if I'm so appointed, I believe that I would be working with a competent team of professionals in different. I don't have to be a physical planner, but I can provide the strategic direction for my physical planners to do their job. I don't have to be a surveyor. So my thinking and what I bring to this job is experience in management, managing teams, aligning resources, placing people where they are most productive, and providing the environment for them to succeed. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, I believe that one of the core competencies I bring on board is strategic leadership. Why many organizations do not succeed, and that is both private and public, is that the leaders at the top want to allocate themselves all the roles, and they want to micromanage everybody. As a strategic leader, I believe I will allow the professionals in the ministry space to exercise their expertise and align them with the agenda of the government. I know that the President has set out 4 critical areas on which we must focus if appointed as cabinet secretaries. That is the area of affordable housing, which is in my docket, the area of healthcare, the area of manufacturing, and food security. You will note, Mr. Speaker, that all these areas are correlated to land. All these players cannot succeed if they do not benefit from the resources in land. And that is why I come in, and that is how I will come in to support them, so that together we can push the government agenda forward. One of the things that I would be hoping to do, Mr. Speaker, is to be a change champion, to coalesce the teams around my ministry, to focus them around the public agenda. Because I think one of the weaknesses in many public institutions is that the vision is at the top, but at the bottom nobody is aware of what you're doing. So having worked in organizations where I played both at a high level and a low level, I know that to succeed, you need to bring the managers at the lower cadres on board. So my experience will come to play. I will bring them on board, coalesce them, bring them together and make them understand why it is critical for us to support these agenda areas of the President, because it is through these 4 areas that we will begin to enjoy economic transformation and prosperity. That is my belief, Mr. Speaker. And as we go along, I believe members can ask me specific questions, but I do believe that the President did not make a mistake in nominating me to serve in his cabinet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Madam Farida, the one member who came in as you are giving us, maybe he could honor for record purposes. Otherwise, he's like what do you call them? An appendage of the institution of Parliament. Introduce yourself for record.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations, Farida,
having been nominated to be a cabinet secretary. Actually, my name is Jimmy Angwenyi, Member of Parliament for Jagr North, Kisii County, Deputy Majority Leader in Parliament, and a member of this committee. But I just want to point out that when I won in a by-election, she covered that winning of mine at that time.
That was in 1997. Is it 97 or 90? Yes, or 96, late. So you can see why is like history in Parliament. Before we allow members, Madam Farida, you could send somebody to collect your CV. We have a look at them. Not necessarily within any particular format. Member for Turkana County.
Thank you, Chair. Just waiting for attention. Thank you, Chair. I first want to congratulate Farida for the nomination, and we're praying that you get it. And I just want to confirm that Turkana is one of the counties that you opened when you started covering issues and during those field trips. And now the big elephant in the room in this country is the land issue. Given the TJRC report and looking at the many challenges that have been facing the sector. So that places land reforms at the heart of Kenya's political and economic stability. My first question then is, what is your interpretation of the land challenges facing this country? And secondly, as a PhD student in strategic management, outline at least 5 specific strategies you will apply in addressing some of the land issues if appointed. Thank you.
For Kamukunji, Farida, just take note of all of them so that we will get first round of 3, then 3 members, not 3 questions.
Thank you.
So if a member can only ask 1 question, it might be a little faster.
Thank you, Chair. My first comment is to congratulate Madam Farida Karoney for her nomination. I haven't had the privilege of being covered by by her, but I must say also that I'm happy that as a former journalist to see another journalist be nominated to such a significant position in our country. And I think you are probably going to handle one of the most important ministries, one of the key ministries, and I note that you're also going to handle housing and urban development. And this ministry is the Ministry of Lands, apart from the historical factors that have been mentioned, is considered to be a cesspit of corruption, nepotism, and incompetence. It is not very functional at the moment, and I want to see what are your thoughts as you get into this challenging position, dealing with cartels, dealing with a place where very little work happens. When you look for a document, it takes you days, if not weeks. What kind of, are you going to be a force for continuity and then finish your time, 5 years, dealing with those issues? Or are you thinking of going to be a force of change to transform that office into an office that really can handle the critical issues that we face in terms of land?
Member for Muranga, yet another one with a background similar to yours.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I share a lot of similarity with Farida, because I also studied education. I did media, then I also did a master's in business strategic management. So I want first to congratulate her. She was my colleague in the media, and so I'm happy to see her here. And as I said again, I'm so proud to see women being appointed into high positions in this country so that they can be able to give us a way forward for the nation. Farida, the appointment that you have been given, you have a very sensitive docket of lands and housing. And my concern is, do you believe that housing is a problem in Kenya? And being part of the Big Four agenda for the Jubilee government, what is your bigger plan on housing? And you can share just a few of your ideas with this committee. Secondly, you know the issue of title deeds are very sensitive in this nation. And Article 7 of the Lands Act 2012, it provides 8 methods of acquisition of title deeds. And clearly the issues of fraud and grabbing is not among them. And as Mishima has mentioned, there's the issue of cartels in the ministry. Kindly share with this committee the specific tools of mechanism you suppose you will use and use, that are going to be useful in handling such challenges in the ministry. And the last one, conflict between the Land Commission and the Ministry of Lands. How do you plan to deal with it? Thank you.
You may respond. Sorry, there's something over here.
Mr. Chairman, if I may start with Honorable Sabina's question so that I can combine with the Honorable Hassan's, because they both talked about cartels and how they make life difficult for ordinary Kenyans. Now, to be able to deal with the cartels, Mheshimiwa, we would need to understand why these cartels are able to flourish. What is it that makes them successful? These cartels are successful because record keeping in our ministry or in the Ministry of Lands hasn't been proper over the years. You find that we still keep physical records. We keep them in places that are, for lack of a better word, maybe dingy. We keep them in places that are not properly kept as record offices. So they are easily available or accessible to third parties who obviously are not interested in transparent processes. So the first thing to do in order to be able to deal with these cartels is to digitize all the records and secure them. I am aware that the process of digitization has started in the ministry, but we need to fast track the process and secure these records, because it is not enough to digitize. You can have the records on digital formats, but if they are still accessible to fraudsters, then you will not have been able to solve the problem. So the first thing we need to do is to digitize all these records and then secure them. This way you eliminate third-party interactions with people seeking land services. If you're an ordinary Kenyan looking out for your title, you want to search something, you don't need all these middlemen in between. You can just go on a digital platform, search, pay, and get the record. So the first thing we need to do in order to eliminate cartels is to fast track the process of digitization of records. We need to digitize all our records and make them available in a secure platform to consumers of land services. So that is one thing I think I would do to eliminate these cartels. You need to digitize all our records. Secondly, we need to put our records in a state that you would be happy as a land consumer or a consumer of land services to walk in there and feel comfortable, because the place is clean, it is neat, it is properly stacked, the records are properly archived and properly labeled. As you wait the full process of digitization, you still have physical records. So as you transition, we need to also improve infrastructure. Some of them may be a bit old, maybe we need to build new ones. But because we are constrained for resources, what can we do in the short term to make sure that these records are available in formats that middlemen do not access them easily? I do understand, and I'm not an insider, that at the moment, you can actually walk home with a file from the Ministry of Lands and maybe resurface with it the next day with a different title in it. So those are the things we do need to eliminate. We need to make it difficult or impossible for third parties or unauthorized persons to access land records. Secondly, apart from the process of digitization, I think we need to train the staff. We need to come from the same space. I think it is Honorable Hassan who said that the staff are lethargic. Maybe they are not. Maybe the vision at the top is not shared at the bottom. Maybe we need to involve these staff members in the process of reform. We need to bring them on board and make them buy in and make them understand and appreciate why these reforms are important. So apart from digitization, I would say let's train the staff, equip them with the skills necessary to serve the Kenyan public. The other thing we need to do, of course, is to make sure that we are securing land rights. One of the biggest problems is that people have no access to land. the people who need land don't have access. There's not an equitable access to land resources. So we need to make sure that land is equitably available to all Kenyans as and when they need it, if they are qualified to get it. Secondly, we need to secure security of tenure. We need to make sure that if you have a title, it is secure and it's your own. That you are not sleeping thinking somebody else will come and steal your title and own that land. So we need to first make sure that we are presenting land records in a manner that allows us to access it in a cost-effective and efficient manner, that they are safe, that everybody has access, and that fraudsters are cut off from the system. You eliminate this fraud. Then thirdly, fourthly, those are three I've mentioned. The fourth thing we do need to do, Mheshimiwa, is to manage land in a manner that complies with the Constitution. Because I think there are many reforms that are ongoing currently in the Ministry of Lands. We need to align all of them with the Constitution, make sure that they comply with what the Constitution says, and that what we have written down is what we are practicing, and that people are not short-circuiting the systems to benefit themselves. So that way, I think, would be a first step. Your second question was on the Land Commission. I think the Constitution is very clear on what the role of the Land Commission is and what the land of the Ministry of Land is. There may be few areas of conflict, but the way I would approach it is, let us put on the table the areas upon which we have no conflict. Let us work on those ones. The areas upon which we have conflict, let us discuss. I think that, to me, this is more or less an issue of human resource management. Conflict, this is a new organization. It is a new system of government we are trying to implement. There will be friction, and the friction will only ease out if you manage it properly. So if we don't agree on certain aspects, let's put them on the table, let's discuss them. The areas on which we agree, why not work together? We don't always have to fight. If we agree on 8 out of 10 items, why are we fighting? If only 2 items are making us fight, let's put them on the table, let's discuss them. That's how I would approach the conflict between the Land Commission and the Ministry of Lands. I think I would say let's focus on the things that bring us together, implement them, expound them, and then minimize the things that cause conflict, and find ways of intervening so that we are not spending half the time fighting and not serving the public. The other issue you asked is about housing and what is my understanding of the President's Agenda 4. I know as a government, the President has purposed to deliver 500,000 units. Our demand currently per year is 200,000 units. We are able to manage only 50,000, and that is mostly done by the private sector. So the new strategy by government is to enable private sector players to participate in this process. And how do you do it? The key drivers of cost or affordable housing is materials. Materials are expensive. Financing is very expensive in Kenya. So what we should be doing as a government is asking ourselves what we need to do to bring down the cost of financing, so that those people who are currently renting houses, for the same amount of money they're using to rent a house, they can buy a house. What do we need to do? How do we need to structure the financing so that it's affordable? I don't believe myself that government should be the one building all these units. I think we should enable private sector or partner with the private sector. It should be a private sector government partnership to deliver these houses. In any case, if they are already building 50,000 units, we should be asking what more do we need to do for them to increase this capacity. Maybe if we take over the cost of infrastructure development, maybe if we build the sewer systems, we put up the streeting lights, maybe the units will be cheaper. So I think I'm speaking now as an outsider, but going inside, if we put these things on the table, we should be asking ourselves what do we need to do to lower the cost of putting up a unit. If we address those issues, the issues of financing, the issues of materials, building designs are very expensive. What is it we need to do to bring them down? If we address these issues, I believe that we should be able to deliver affordable housing. But to me, the other issue I have with this is that we also need to look at the quality of this affordable housing. Currently in Kenya, even in rural areas, I think 46% of Kenyans don't even have a toilet, let alone a house. So we are talking toilets. People are using the neighboring forest and all. So we need to do basic things first. Have the big picture, start small and scale it up. So even as we look for the financing, as we structure these programs, can we do basic things? Can we start a public education campaign Can we work with our communities? I'm sure we can work with our county governments, our local leaders, our political leaders. Why is it that our people don't have toilets? We should be able to do these things, and I don't think they require a lot of resources. So to me, it's a question of just refocusing the energies. I think the strategies are there. I think we just need to refocus our energies and push forward. To go back to Honorable Hassan's question, I think I've answered the question on cartels. I hope I have answered you sufficiently. And then you asked whether I will be a force of change or whether I will go and become part of the problem. I do not intend to become part of the problem. I believe that part of the reason why His Excellency the President has gotten me from where I am, I'm publicly known as a change leader, a worker, very motivated. I'm self-driven. I don't touch something that I don't believe in. If I wasn't able, if I thought for a minute that this job is too hard for me, I wouldn't have accepted it or accepted the nomination. Maybe I would have called the president and told him, maybe, Chief, I think you made a mistake. But I believe I'm equal to the task. I have the energy, I have the intellectual capacity, and the ability to work with teams to deliver this change. And I want to promise you and honorable members that if given this appointment, you will begin to see change. I know there's a lot going on in the ministry even as we speak. Maybe part of the challenge they are facing is nobody is telling their story. They are doing a lot of things. There's a lot of reform going on there, but we know very little. The only thing we know is cartels, because that is what is in the public domain. But there's so much more we could do and we are doing, and we should be able to communicate and rally the public to support the initiatives. Then the honorable member for Turkana, she asked me to outline what are the challenges in land. I think I've answered partially. The biggest problem with land in Kenya is inequitable access. Some people have easy access, others don't have access. So the first thing we do need to do, and all these things are spelled out in law and in the Constitution, we just need to actualize it. Just make sure that people have equitable access to land, that you give them titles so that they can use it as a factor of production, so that they can use it for economic transformation. It is no use sitting on land for which you have no title, because then you cannot use it viably economically. The other thing we need to do is to align all our laws and align all the programs and related services. The person doing physical planning, the person doing survey, the person allocating the title. All these people should work together so that the process is faster and seamless. The other thing we need to do is, I will not tire, we need to digitize our records. Before you put these records on digital format, it is still easy for fraudsters to deprive Kenyans of land or to steal land from other Kenyans. So I will not tire of saying that we really need to put these records on digital form and on secure platforms. And the management leaders at the ministry, the CS and the PS, should always be in touch with the various divisions working on these programs to ensure that it's actually happening and it's not just on paper. Because I've read a lot of briefs and I know all these things are on paper. We just need to make sure that it's happening. I hope I have answered you sufficiently. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very well. Just to give fresh guidance, you know, we came into this chamber, it's a bit archaic. So the things are manual. So I just want for the nominees benefit, because we'll be still getting another round of 3 persons asking. The moment you see this yellow light, you have a balance of 3 minutes. The moment you see this one, you will have a balance of 30 seconds. Thereafter, your microphone will be switched off automatically through some other system. So even members, bear in mind that you don't also, because I can see there is a lot of interest in asking questions to the nominee, don't ask too many, a mouthful to the nominee. And now, we move away from people with media background. We go now to, of course, you know our rules in the House. When the leader majority intends to ask, the rest, you know, you must, yeah. So the leader majority.
Thank you, Chair. And congratulations, Farida, for your nomination as the CS for Lands, Housing and Urban Development. Two questions. One,
thank you.
I am sure you are aware of the High Court ruling by Judge Joseph Ogutu nullifying titles for the single reason that titles which were issued without the consultation of the National Land Commission were null and void. And he has given government 1 year to fix that legal shortcomings. What is your strategy? Are you ready to comply with the 1 year if you get a job? Number two, this is very hypothetical. You know, you say the communications, government does not communicate. I think coming from the media, government communicates. It's only that the media in this country, you know, want to report on negative issues. They want headlines that. But my question is this: James Orengo, Minister for Lands in the 10th Parliament, promised digitization of the land system in Kenya. Charity Ngilu ran up and down this country in the 2013 11th Parliament and said, I have digitized the land sector. Professor Kaimenyi, a dentist, you know, a lawyer, James Orengo, then a dentist, became the Minister for Lands, and he said he has digitized. And I want to confirm, and I hope the PS, current PS Lands and the CEO of Land Commission is watching me now. 10 days ago, I asked for a search, both through their two offices and even through my lawyer. And it took, last month, it took 28 days until, you know, so sadly, the PS and the CEO of Land Commission and my lawyer were telling me the file has disappeared. Last I asked them, the last time I did a search was 2016. They said that the person who gave you that search on that date maybe has hidden the file. So if James Orengo could not do it, Charity Ngilu, very flamboyant minister, you know, with a lot of stories, could not do it. Professor, the dentist, could not do it. Why should we believe you? Why should we think you from, again, a communication expert, a media, you will do it? What is Parliament, and the Speaker will agree with me, has been allocating resources for that digitization. Can you convince that you now, Farida Karoney, the 12th Parliament, the new CS, if approved, you will give Kenyans that from our laptops, from our offices, we can know the status of the land that Kenyans or private or public people own?
Member for Lunga. The member for Lunga is called Khatib Mwashetani.
Yes, this way, yeah.
I'm not able to.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, let me congratulate Farida for being nominated to this docket. My question, I want to go directly to the question itself. It is about squatters. As we know, the country is demonized by squatters, and we still, until today, we haven't gotten solutions. And mostly in Coast Province, I think it is one of the issues that we are really grappling with. I don't know what is your take on it. Thank you.
Madam Sarah Korere.
Having listened to the good lady Farida Karoney and her background as a media personality, I would really love to have a very candid and honest answer from her about what her feeling is with the government switching off the television stations after the infamous swearing in of somebody. Then
you ignore that. It's not part of this. So ask you a question, or maybe we give the member for now.
Chairman. Another question: land issues in this country, and especially the historical land injustices, whereby we've seen a lot of indigenous communities being squatters in their own land, being homeless in the very places they call their historical land. What is your approach towards, making sure that these Kenyans who are homeless, who are actually landless in their own homes, are made to feel like the Constitution of Kenya is something to celebrate, that they can finally have somewhere to call home in Kenya? And secondly, the land issues in this country has caused so many loss of lives and loss of resources. It is a conflict that is always waiting like a time bomb that explodes after every circle of electioneering period. Part of the conflict we see during electioneering period is actually stimulated by land conflicts and issues around the land. What is you as a person, as a cabinet secretary, what are you going to do to address some of these conflict? And finally, the National Land Commission is another commission, and an independent commission that very many Kenyans had a lot of hopes with. What are you going to do as a cabinet secretary to make sure that you complement, or rather the National Land Commission complement your work, as opposed to the infighting and the competition we saw in the last 3 years between the National Land Commission and the Ministry of Land?
Respond to those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with Honorable Farida Karoney's question, because I've answered, so it should be easier to take it up. You asked about the National Land Commission and what I'm going to do as CSE appointed to reduce the conflict. As I said earlier, the easiest way to address conflict is to define the problem. Why is the Land Commission and the Ministry of Lands, why are they fighting? Once you have defined the problem, define your points of interest. Where is it that your interests converge? If you're not fighting on 80% of the issues, then address those ones. Then you remain with 20%, it should be much easier to address. I think the challenge has been that the two institutions are focused on the few things that divide them at the expense of the many things that they can work in collaboration. So how I would deal with that problem is to first look at what is it that is making these organizations fight. Then what is it that we can work collaboratively together? Once you work in collaboration with an organization and you have only a few issues that pending resolution, it should be much easier to work. But I think over the last 1 year, I haven't seen as many fights as I saw in the term of the Honorable Charity Ngilu. Maybe they have found a way somehow, but it is also good for us as a ministry to try and manage relations. I think this is basically just an issue of managing the relationship between the Commission and the Ministry of Lands. So I don't think it is an insurmountable challenge. I think it is a challenge that can be surmounted. If I go back to the issue of Kenyans being killed because of issues of land, I think the government has issued over the last 5 years 3.2 million titles. That is a first step to making sure people don't fight. Give people security of land, make sure land rights, let them own the land. I think in the current planning period, there's a target of another 1 million titles. So if you issue titles to people, to individuals, to communities, you will reduce the conflicts over land. The reason why there's so much conflict over land, there's a lot of land which has not been alienated, and people are fighting over it, especially community lands. There's conflict between maybe pastoral communities, communities that use land as a resource, conflict with the wildlife management systems. So if you delineate, adjudicate, and title this land, you should be able to reduce that conflict. So as Minister for Lands, if nominated, what I would first do is to find out the communities that have rights to land. So you record them, recognize, and register them, and then you give them title. Once you've given them title, you should be able to deal with the issues of conflict between the community and the other users of land that are in conflict with the community land. So the easiest way to manage this conflict is to make sure people have titles, have right to their land. If you're sitting on land for which you have no title, it is very easy for conflict to arise. So it is paramount that as government, we fast track and double the process of issuing titles to communities that don't have them. Then you talk about historical land injustices. I think the Constitution assigns the role of investigating historical land injustice to the National Land Commission. If there's a specific issue, it should then be referred to the Commission. It is investigated. Once the issue has been fully investigated, then we can mitigate and see where the solutions lie. But you would need a specific issue, a specific problem, or a specific community of persons claiming that historical injustice, and then it can be fully investigated by the National Land Commission. I was asked by the chairman to skip the question on switching off of TV, so I will proceed to the Honorable Mwashetani's question on squatters. I think there's an ongoing program, Mishima, of resettlement of squatters. I think out of the government has targeted to resettle 5,000 families. I think this planning period, we have targeted to resettle about 3,300 families. Most of those families are in the coast, Kwale, Kilifi, I think some is in Uasin Gishu, so it's an ongoing process. And I think the president personally has committed to making sure that these squatters, once their rights to that land has been confirmed, are actually resettled and given title to that land. So that is an ongoing process. And I think we will just make sure that it stays on course. To the other question, the Honorable Duale's question, he's been searching for a title and it went missing. It is the same problem that I spoke about, Mheshimiwa. Our records are not properly kept. They are accessible to third parties who are not authorized to access them. And maybe that is how your title disappeared. And even what we have digitized so far, my understanding is that we need to ask for a systems audit to ensure that the system is secure, it is fast, it is robust. Because one of the other challenges I have heard is that you can actually search, but it can take you a whole day. It shouldn't. So we need to interrogate this system and find out what is wrong with it. Is it the capacity of the system? Do we have the right system? So I think that we shouldn't give up on the process of digitization. Let us audit what we have done so far. The part of the work was done by Honorable Guinea, most of it actually, but I think we have only so far managed to digitize only 18 registries out of 57. So we still have a long way to go. But even the ones that we have digitized, the records are not easily accessible even in that digital format. So clearly there's a problem with that system. So what I would commit to doing, Honorable Duale, is to make sure that we have a robust system and a system that works and a secure system, so that even as you access your records digitally, they are still very secure. In terms of the matter before the court, I think the court gave an extension last week for a further 6 months. Okay, I'm seeing her.
Well, not yet. I haven't even switched anything. You are right. You're on the right course because what you are saying is factual.
Yeah.
Yeah. Proceed.
So the court has given further directions, Honorable Duale, and a further extension of 6 months, and this is to allow consultation with Parliament. This is the regulations that are to operationalize the land laws. So once we exhaust that mechanism, and I think I'll be coming before the Committee of Parliament on Lands to request that we fast track this process, then we should be able to guarantee security of those titles that the court had put in abeyance pending the discussions on the regulations. So we haven't exhausted. We asked for an extension and we got a further 6 months. Thank you.
Very well. At least we finished before I could put on the lights. But I think it will be important that you also have your team, if you are confirmed, to look at the regulations as proposed. I've gone through them myself. Yeah. But just to make sure, your team must make sure that they are in conformity with the decision by Justice Omuto. So that because if they are not in consonance with what the judge suggested in his decision, in his judgment, then they run the risk of being again declared irregular. And recently we've seen the chair of the National Land Commission, I saw him, I think, recently making some noise about, I don't know what he was making noise about, but I think there's need, of course, for, as you said, for a harmonious coexistence. But maybe the fact that I think they house too many of their staff within the ministry could be a very unhealthy and incestuous in a relationship or form of coexistence, which needs to be addressed. The next round of questions, now that I can see everybody wants to, Madam Farida, you'll bear with us. You can see so many hands up. So this is the way it is, becomes problematic in the House. These are just 19. Then Majority Whip, now I will have to just say how it is going to go so that we can clear one side once and for all. Majority Whip, Honorable Sankok, member for Kikuyu. Then all of you will ask.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I have to admit that after listening to the nominee, at least I can see there is some hope at the end of the day, because she is actually in the course of convincing me that she is able to deliver. A quick one, Chair. I don't know whether she has gotten this information. Currently, the government is privatizing sugar factories, and stakeholders have been sitting for quite some time, and we have agreed that the best way to privatize is to privatize the mills and the land under the factory. But for land under the nucleus estate where they are planting cane, should be held, should be community land held in trust by the county governments. As the CS, the incoming CS, hoping that you will be able to go through, how would you advise the community to use that land, given that it will be under the care of the county governments?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Congratulations, Farida. You also heard my story once when I was elected as a SONU chairman, and subsequently when we went to demonstration. But unfortunately, the same information was used to suspend me from the University of Nairobi for a period of some years. Farida, land issue, as you have heard from honorable members, is a very emotive issue. And it is an issue that surely Kenyans are watching closely, because we even don't know the boundaries of our forests. They keep disappearing every now and then. Some of the public lands have two title deeds, the title deed for the public and a title deed for an individual or a private developer, yet both title deeds have been issued by the same government. Now, if you succeed, which I hope you will succeed, what do you see as an immediate issue that ought to be addressed within this ministry? And what are you doing, or what measures will you put in place to tackle these issues? Lastly, you actually gave us your academic credential, your working experience, but surely we want to know what can we associate with Farida, your name, in terms of your professional values, ambitions, your motivation to contribute new ideas, your ability to actively shape your future responsibility, your honesty in terms of self-assessment and with colleagues, the extent to which your action match your words. Mr. Speaker, I was very happy to learn that Kaimenyu was a dentist. You know, what alikuwa anangoa nini ndani ya mashamba?
Member for Kikuyu.
Thank you, Chair. And Let me begin by saying I'm impressed by Farida's presentation, considering it's her first public nomination. But with that in mind, she did point out, or rather, CS nominee did point out that part of your work at Royal Media Services has been managing both people and managing relations with government. In relation to the question asked, I think, by the Honorable Sarah Korere, with the switch off, Citizen Media, which belongs to Royal Media House, is the only station that as of this morning was still switched off. Do you think then you have succeeded in managing relations between government and Royal Media Services as a private entity? Two, you have mentioned that some of the key drivers to cheaper housing is materials, but land is also a key factor in the cost of housing, and housing being one of the Agenda 4 pillars. What do you think, in your view, you will do now as a CS if you got appointed? One, to make sure that the cost of land for building houses in urban centers becomes cheaper. Two, establishing a land bank of all land that is publicly owned, both by the national government, MDAs, and even county governments, to be able to build and develop houses on this land that would effectively be much cheaper than houses built on private land. Lastly is on the question of cartels, and you did say, and I hope you will bring in, you've done very well, I must say, in Royal Media Services in terms of digitizing your broadcast services. And I hope you bring the same digitization to the Lands Ministry. And you've pointed out from the question asked by the majority leader that even where digitization has been done, it has not really worked in the Lands Ministry. And I want to put it to you, it is very vicious cartels that do exist in that ministry. We may run away from that fact, but it is a fact of life. Do you have the stamina? Do you have the strength and the courage to deal with those very dangerous corruption cartels in that ministry?
Well, those are three, are they not? Member for Mumias, Ole Sankok, member for Kikuyu. Three.
I'll start by responding to the Honourable Member for Mumias by indicating that first, I do not have the information on the privatization of the factories, so I don't think I'm competent to comment on that for now. But as far as the community land is concerned, once it is made available as community land, I think then it will then be adjudicated and titled, and at that point, discussions can happen with the county governments on what kind of use should be ascribed to those community lands. I can only respond to the part of community land because I'm not informed about the other issue. Honorable Sankok, you talk about boundaries and the fact that we are still facing serious challenges in terms of titling of land and ownership of land. It is true, it is still a big issue. Issues of ownership in land in Kenya, as you've correctly said, are still quite emotive, and that is why when it comes to trying to adjudicate, it takes a long time because people literally defend their lands with their lives. So it is a process that has to be undertaken carefully and cautiously with respect to whichever communities are involved. But with the process the government has started of issuing titles and making sure that the communities have rights to their own lands, I think it will take time, but it will happen. Because this is a problem that we faced since independence 50 years plus. I think it would be unrealistic of us to expect that it will just disappear in 5 years. It can't. But the process has started. Government is working very hard, and I'm aware that the PS Lands currently is actually working very hard in Bekasi to try and adjudicate and make sure those people in Bekasi have titles. The process is ongoing in different parts of the country. So I think it's a process that we have to allow some space for the process to take place before we can say we have failed or we have succeeded. But I think we are going to succeed, judged by what has happened so far. Even the last 5 years, we've issued more than 3 million titles. It is an indication that we are going to succeed. So I would ask that we be patient. Should I be nominated, we'll take up the matter. And it's a matter that I intend to pursue very vigorously, because apart from just the communities such as the one that you come from, Mishima, women is the other sector that should not be disenfranchised. We should allow women to own land, because Our traditional setup is such that we believe that land should be owned by men. It shouldn't. Women should have access to land. And that is why we are talking about issues of equitable access, so that people can use this land to spur economic prosperity. So be patient, that will be handled as we go along, because the government is working on it. It is not theory we're talking about, it's actually something that is happening. And I think you've seen the president and his deputy issuing titles in different parts of the country. Regarding what I would associate with my name, I think I'm a good worker. I work very hard. I put in an honest day's work. I'm a fair person. I build teams. In the organizations that I've worked for, if you go there, there are people who have grown from very low to high up in management. I think one of the key things that I would say I'm proud of is not even the fact that I was a journalist. It's the fact that I have grown people. Because no organization can succeed if you do not grow people. So what can you associate with my name? I grow people. I allow people the space to grow. My management philosophy has been that you hire people who are smarter than you, because then work will happen very fast. If you want to be the only one shining, so you hire people who are not too competent, then you'll have a problem. So my philosophy is get smart people and work will get done. How will I transpose this to the public sector? I think the public sector has some of the most educated human beings that I know. If you look at role profiles of people in public sector, they are very highly educated, very well-trained human resource. Maybe we need to manage them slightly differently, but I do believe that there's opportunity for us to work with our workers in the public sector to drive some of these changes that we are talking about, because I think we have the resources, the intellectual capacity, the knowledge to drive some of this change. We just need to drive the vision much harder so that we are reading from the same page. To the question of, cartels, and it was asked by Kimani Waishungwa. Mheshimiwa, it is true, the cartels are there and they are vicious. But I don't think we are going to give up because they are cartels. I think our aspiration as a nation is to have a country where things are done transparently, where things are done legally, where things are done within parameters that we have defined ourselves. And that is why I keep insisting that to minimize, I don't think we'll eliminate it overnight, to minimize these cartels, let us secure our records. The reason why these cartels walk the corridors of Earthy House is because they know our records are not secure. They know that they can access our records. They know that they can manipulate our records. If we secure these records, we digitize them, it will be a lot harder for them to come and pull out a title overnight and place another one over it. If you have your title on a digital form, even yourself as a landowner will have access to it on digital form. So it will be more difficult for them to play around with records. Secondly, because of historical issues, there are a lot of uncollected titles. I think there are Kenyans who own land, they have titles sitting in the Ministry of Lands. We need to educate our people. Once you finish a land transaction, get your title. Put it in the safe custody of a bank or some other place, but for God's sake, don't leave it in the Ministry of Lands, because there are so many uncollected titles. Why is it that they are there? Maybe the cost of transactions, I don't know, but there are many titles which have not been collected. So there are many ways to address the problem. First, let us secure these records. I think to me that is very important. Once the records are secure, it is harder for the cartels to walk around with files and changing them. Secondly, let us encourage Kenyans to collect their titles when they have them. Why would you have a title and say it is safer in the Ministry of Lands? I think rural communities do that a lot. They think that if your title is in the Ministry of Lands, it is safer than when it is in your house or in the bank or somewhere else. So we need to educate our communities that in order to guarantee security of your own parcel, then you need to have access to your title in a place that is safe and secure. Not necessarily in your house. I don't think you should keep it in your house if you're in the village, but you shouldn't, for God's sake, leave it in the Ministry of Lands. So I want to give you hope, Mheshimiwa, that I think I have courage. I think I'm determined. I don't expect that it's going to be a walk in the park. I think it's going to be difficult, but I will count on the support of all of you. It is a problem affecting all of us. I don't think I can do it alone. The Ministry of Lands cannot do it alone. We have to work collectively in order to deliver that change. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, in the event that you're successful, you will obviously be dealing with one of committees, very active committees. I now want to give this chance to the chair of that committee, the Honorable Richo Nyamai, Dr. Richo Nyamai, member for Kitui South.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to congratulate you for making it to that hot seat. Not many women make it.
Thank you.
And tell you that our interaction with the ministry in the last 2 weeks has been both enjoyable, but we have really learned that there is a lot that you're going to do if you get appointed. So I'm wishing you well. But I would like to ask you, Honorable Duale just put it that he is not able to get his title. And I think that relates with many Kenyans who cannot get their titles. And this is because of deliberate inefficiency occasioned by the officers in the ministry, both at the national level and also at the county level. How are you going to deal with this? In our interaction with the outgoing cabinet secretary, he informed us that if today something happens to that house that houses the Ministry of Lands and all the documents disappear, there is nowhere else that Kenyans can get their documents from. What is it that you plan to do in the event that you're given this appointment? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Member for Pokot South.
Thank you, Chair. And coming from the housing context where I chair, Mr. Chairman, I want to ask the CS whether she might have thought about this. The ambitious program which we have of giving the people of Kenya 500,000 houses to 1 million. Where do you think the people of Kenya will get the money to buy the houses? Because one thing is to build, and this is a thinking process, and now you are coming. And I'm very certain that you are brought in also to help us, in the thinking process, so that we don't build houses, and then where will the people of Kenya get the houses? Two, and in infrastructure sector, our problem is land, and particularly when you're acquiring land to build public projects, and this will be a big problem in this country going forward. Now that there's no empty land, when you're building a public project like a dam, for example, then what happens is, if people learn that there's a project coming, then either some of them come and buy land for speculation, or even put the prices at exorbitant level so that we don't progress. Projects are going to be very expensive because of land. What will be your contribution in order to arrest this factor going forward? Because we will develop, we will also have more programs. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Baride.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Congratulations, Farida, for this befitting nomination.
Thank you.
And I really hope that you will be approved to be the CS of Lands. Now, my concern is related to what the former member has just spoken to, that one of the biggest challenges we are facing today is that our major projects in the country are becoming increasingly expensive when it comes to compensation of the landowners, because the amount at which they want to be compensated are completely unrealistic, and there's certainly a need for a policy to be able to guide the compensation and the pricing of that compensation. And I would want to know what you think from where you sit and what to expect from you in terms of ensuring that we make our, especially the mega projects, less expensive, and that even the compensation process becomes expedited, so that we are able to begin implementation of the same projects in time, so that we don't have unnecessary delays. And again, sitting there as a woman, I would like to know how you intend to protect women who are disinherited of their land when their husbands pass on. And this is very, very common in where we come from. Any member of parliament here will tell you they have had to deal with several women, and not just several, many women who go to them, either their husbands have sold their only piece of land without their knowledge, or they are disinherited of the very land that they are left when their husbands die. They die before them, and so they end up in abject poverty. And this happens in collusion with land officers at the county level. So I would like to know what you think needs to be done to ensure that women are protected in terms of their property rights as per the Constitution.
Well, even as you respond, it's also fair to point out that we know that Article 60 of the Constitution calls for the elimination of gender discrimination in both law, customs, and practices in matters related to land, ownership, inheritance, and et al. And that I think the 11th Parliament did address the issue by passing a number of legislation. So, question of implementation, that I think it may be what is lacking. Proceed.
Okay. Let me start with the Honorable Chair for Lands. She speaks about deliberate inefficiencies in the Ministry of Lands and asks what we should do to eliminate these inefficiencies. It is true, Mishima, that some of our processes are highly inefficient. That is true. It is also true that some of it may be deliberate, because the moment you start dealing with physical records, automatically you introduce inefficiency. If you are going to move from the point at which you write a sale agreement, you buy land, you get a deed, you get a title, and each of those processes is manual, that is inefficiency. It takes you a long time to obtain a service that should ideally take you a few days. So I will not tire, but I will insist that the easiest and most effective way to reduce the cost of managing land is to automate these processes. We cannot be continuing in 2018 to transact things on paper when the world has gone digital. We need to transfer most of our processes to digital forms, not just the land transaction processes, even our mapping. I think we need to go to start geomapping. I mean, you use technology to map our lands, to draw our beacons. And I think that is work that is already going on in the Ministry of Lands from the brief I got from the PS. I think there's a lot of work already ongoing to automate most of these systems, to make sure the mapping process is electronic, to make sure the recording process is digital, and all the processes that you need to go through before you own land are actually in digital form. The other thing that the ministry is working on currently is developing a spatial data infrastructure. This way you're able to, on a computer, tell what is placed where on a map in Kenya. So if you are an investor wanting to invest in Turkana, you don't need to go to look for a physical map of Turkana. You can log onto your computer, see what infrastructure is there. Is there a water line? Is there a power line? Is there internet? All those things is what government is now working on. But of course, it's all good to talk about things saying we are working on. The challenge, or where the rubber meets the road, is actually implementation. It's all good when we talk and we say, oh, you will see Kenya on a map, it's good. But are we going to implement it? I think that if we are committed, and I want to assure you from my briefings before this interview, the government is committed at the highest level possible to making sure that Kenyans have access to land. And they have access to land in a cost-effective manner, in a manner that reduces conflict. So yes, it's a lot of work, it's ongoing, but it's happening and it will happen. And if you do approve my nomination, it is one of the things that I will push very hard, because I don't believe that in this day and age, we should be running manual records for 40 million people. It's an impossible thing to do. To the MP for Pokot South, Order Pokosing, how do we make housing affordable? There are different ways, and I'm not an expert in financing. It's just reading up, and I think when we do get to the actual work, we'll get the professionals to do it. But on the face of it, I do think that we need to find ways to make the cost of credit lower. We need to make loans affordable to people at a lower cadre. Currently, there are only, from my information, 24,000 mortgages in a country of 40 million. That's really low. What can we do to make it affordable? The current program of government under this agenda for priority areas is to enable Kenyans to buy a house for the same amount of money they are paying rent. The thinking is, if you can afford to pay rent, and you are told for that amount of money you're using to pay rent, we want you to buy a house, then as government we should be thinking, then what do we need to do to make that possible? So I think we need to look at different financing options that make it possible to access credit at that rate, so that you can pay over a longer period and you live in your house. Instead of paying rent, you're paying rent towards home ownership. We can give incentives to first-time homeowners, because I think one of the challenges we face is many of us are risk averse, and we have this idea that mortgage is risky, don't do it. But if we can assure you that for what you're paying rent, you can buy your house, I think it would be possible to build houses at a lower rate. The National Housing Corporation should also be enabled to give loans to rural Kenyans. I think they used to do it a while back. I don't know what happened. But if you are in a rural area and you're given a loan of 2 million, you can build a good house. So I think we need to enable the National Housing Corporation to support Kenyans to get loans to own homes and give them a longer period to pay so that it's not strenuous. Financing options can be worked out with government. The other way to lower the cost of land is, of course, to make the price of land predictable. You know, the price of land in Kenya is not predictable, especially for projects, and that is what Honorable Cecily Mbarire was asking. I am aware that the Ministry of Lands is working on a land value index, so that if you're coming to invest in Nairobi, you know that if I go and buy land in Bekasi, this is what I expect to pay. If I go to buy land in Kajiado, this would be the price. So it is, I think, important that we fast track this process of creating an index for the value of land, so that Kenyans, or so that public projects especially, are not expensive. Because what happens is, the moment Kenyans know that a railway is going to pass through my neighborhood, it's speculation. The price becomes 3 times what is the normal price is. But if you create an index and you know that this is the price and it's not going to go up, if it does, it will be by a small margin, I think then we'll be able to manage the cost of land for public projects. So let's, my priority would then be to work with the ministry to finalize this land value index, and maybe avail a bill before Parliament if it's not already there. I'm not sure of the details, but I know the ministry is working on an index. I'm aware that there's a pilot project in, I think, Mombasa and Bomet, to see how it's going to work. So these are some of the programs that we need to experiment on and see how quickly it will turn around in terms of lowering the cost of land. For Honorable Cecily, you talked about, yeah, I think I've answered the compensation question. We just need to fix the price of land. It can't be that it's not predictable. It needs to be predictable for the price to be manageable for government. Regarding how to make sure women are not disinherited, I think there are some pieces of legislation already, the Matrimonial Properties Act. I think that the implementation is not as good as it should be. I think that the communities also need to be, we need to keep talking to our communities and to our women. We can't assume that people know that it's 2018 and they should know that a woman has a right to own land. We have to keep talking about these things, and we have to keep engaging the institutions responsible for enforcing these laws. Because you said it yourself, as a woman you have to fight for your space. Nobody's going to give it to you on a silver platter. So I think as women leaders, we must come together. We must help our women at the grassroots to appreciate that they have rights, that it is within their rights and they can actually own that land. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very well.
Have I forgotten?
Well, there's still a member for Nakuru East, David Nkaria, last.
Thank you, Speaker. Just on the questionnaire that had already been given to her, and under item number 21, deferred income / future benefits was left blank. I mean, for purposes of us looking at your future lifestyle audit, it would have been important for us to have that. And secondly, in urban areas, a lot of land had been set aside for public use. And I'm talking to this because I made a letter regarding some parcel of land in a place called Nakuru East Ward, where we have almost 32 parcels of land set aside for public use. And I wanted to, we wanted to have a title deed in the name of the government for purposes of avoiding land grabbers from coming to get those pieces of land. But the charges that were being charged by the ministry were so exorbitant, and I didn't know who was supposed to pay. Because when I made the request, I was told there are some charges which were, is there a possibility of waiving those kind of fees and charges within the ministry so that those lands can be able to get their title deeds and we stop them from being grabbed?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. On the title deeds, I'm aware that when government issued the 3 million titles that were issued in the last 5 years, there were some waivers that were allowed in order to allow people to own the titles. On the specific issue you raise, I would have to investigate, but I'm sure that it can be addressed. Because if in the previous titling of the previous 3 million titles, it was possible to give some waivers for people to own the titles, then I think it is something that can be discussed if it's properly brought before the ministry. I would say it's possible to do it. I don't have a straight answer because I don't have the facts, but I would say it's possible to do it. You asked about another question?
The 21. The questionnaire.
Yes, sorry, I'm looking for it.
Honorable Bekasi is referring
on
to
future income.
Future, yes.
Yeah.
Defined
Yeah, I've seen it.
future benefits. Is it? Anticipated income from receipt, stocks, and things like this.
Okay. The only future income I expect in reference to that section is to the proceeds I'll get from the sale of a company in which I hold shares. I'm aware that under Article 6 of the Constitution, as a public officer, you cannot engage in other forms of gainful employment. I'm a shareholder in a private company, a profitable business company. I intend to sell those shares, and that is probably the only future income I expect to get outside public service. Yeah.
Very well. I think, of course, just to let you know again that you made reference to the Land Value Index bill that actually it had been tabled. The leader majority and already published it, and we have again, he has already submitted it, and we have approved it for it to be republished. Because I think the issues raised are also very important going forward as to how public projects are going to be planned for and undertaken. So you will again, if you are successful, you find yourself engaging with the Lands Committee when the bill is read. After it is read for the first time, the committee will have an opportunity to engage with you. It's something that, for me, I think it's important to note.
Thank you.
Now that I see no further questions, I want to thank you for having been able to respond to all the questions. And like you had the member for Mumi Assist, who's the majority whip, chief whip, he did intimate that you are almost on the verge of persuading him. I believe most likely by now he is more than persuaded. He's crossed over. We want to thank you, Farida. And also it's interesting that after reading the documents you say you submitted, that we have also discovered that you have another name, Alice. So when you meet some of these members, they may refer to you as Alice, and that might distinguish you from the Farida of the media.
The degree was signed by Kaimeny.
What?
The degree, her master's degree was signed by Kaimeny as an academic.
Yeah, which is okay. That is why it is important that earlier in the day we talked about so much about youth being mentored. So it was okay for Professor Kaimeny to have signed a university degree, one of them, and she takes over from him. I think that's progress. We should be happy. Unless, Farida, you have something you want to say to us as a parting shot, we would release you and also release your CV. But also just to confirm to the country that we have not, as a committee, received any representation against your nomination as to suitability and the rest from any Kenyan in the form that is required under Section 6, Subsection 9 of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act. Parting shot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and thank the committee for engaging with me. If you approve my nomination, I look forward to working with all of you, because I know the Ministry of Lands has a lot of work, and that work cannot happen without Parliament. So I will still look forward to engaging with and working with all of you if you do approve my nomination. And I thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Member for Nakuru East, you better put off your...
Oh, sorry.